A book has now been released documenting his entire life as a quiet man using SARS to fund post-apartheid South African investigative journalist and author Evelyn Groenink is in fact his wife, and she and the former Deputy Commissioner at SARS, Ivan Pillay, join us for a bit more on what to make of what's happened and how to move forward. To the both of you, Ivan and Evelyn, great to have you on the AM Report. Thanks so much for your time. Evelyn, I want to start with you, having had authored this book in some respects. Many people will be asking why this is an important story to tell. What would be your response to that?
Well, the backside of the book says it's just Ivan's luck to be married to an investigative journalist. So I had to tell this story. It's not just his story, it's a story of 30 years in South Africa. I'm not South African, I'm Dutch, but I went through everything with Ivan. And what I tried to show is how much work it was to first build an underground, then go through the negotiations, which he was also part of, then try to build a new South Africa, which he did as part of the people who built SARS. It's so much building in a country that actually is scarred by so much trauma and pain, overcoming all that and trying to build something new and then seeing it all go down again and then trying again. The book is dedicated to those who keep carrying on. So it's not just Ivan, it's a lot of people that I met and saw and was in awe of in the past 30 years that, you know, they went through so much and they're still trying to make it work.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the point I was going to make. Plenty has been endured, and those challenges in some respects still continue today. Ivan, those challenges for you have been very, call it, public, and you know, the SARS Rogue Unit is the many ways through which you've been forced to, I guess, dig in and find a reason to continue. One of the latest developments we've sort of learned in the public domain was Minister Pravin Gordhan now conceding, in fact, that there was some kind of unit. He does clarify, though, when he spoke at the state capture inquiry, that the unit had other objectives and not the ones that were initially, you know, brought forward through the media. In hindsight, with the benefit of being able to look back, was the unit even useful for SARS, considering how much of a headache potentially it became for you?
The type of unit that we had, is actually standard for almost every revenue service. A revenue service has to deal with the illicit economy. There is a continuum of non-compliance, and you can get people who are non-compliant because they make errors. You can get people who are non-compliant because they don't know the laws, etc. And the other end of the continuum are people who are deliberately non-compliant. So it's absolutely normal to have a capacity that deals with the other end of the continuum. You've got to deal with the whole continuum. Minister Pravin Gordhan acknowledged that such a unit existed. And indeed it did. Nobody's denying it. What we stress is that this is a unit, later, finally it was called the high-risk unit, that dealt with high-risk cases. And indeed it was so effective that it actually provoked a lot of reaction from across the board, so that you actually had an intersection of various interests who wanted to close down this unit. And they, sad to say, they succeeded as part of the state capture program.
Right. And again, now that we're able to look back at what we now have known to have happened and what perhaps didn't happen, do you think the unit had opened itself to those exact risks, essentially being used for proxy wars in the political space, being usurped in some instances through the disinformation campaign we've seen over the years?
Look, as I've said, most revenue units would have such a unit. So actually, it's not sensational, it's not controversial. And I do believe the present commissioner of SARS also said that he will be forming the units to focus on the illicit economy. You have to. You know, there's a continual process. Some people call it safe maker, safe breaker. There's a continual process. You have laws, you have regulations. People are going to try and undermine it. You then have the capacity you develop the capacity to try and tighten up. And it's a continuous process.
Right.
Unfortunately, the way some people operate is that when they see weaknesses and when they see an area of work that is not covered, they occupy the space. And if you reality is that you leave a space unoccupied, somebody else is going to take it.
Are you talking about organized crime?
Yeah, I'm talking about organized crime.
Mm.
So the people who called it a rogue unit were actually distorting the truth, which was that it was an investigative unit dealing with organized crime and, you know, tobacco and all kinds of mafia things. And it's described in the book.
Right.
So it is those very people who projected it back to say, no, this unit is rogue. Actually, criminals have used this label of rogue in their court cases, trying to get away scot-free, saying, no, we are the good guys, they are the bad guys. That was the whole intention from the start.
Right. And, you know, part of that objective was carried through the media, mainstream media, that is. Evelyn, you and I work as journalists. I can conceptualize how even some of our colleagues could be co-opted into this, perhaps sometimes even unknowingly. How does telling these sort of stories, do you think, help in combating that, in closing those loopholes, so to speak?
Well, I don't know if I'm doing it as well as, for instance, somebody like Professor Anton Harper did in his book, where he actually unraveled the entire journalism, which wasn't journalism, behind that rogue unit story. He shows that there were recordings that were not recordings. There were photographs that were not photographs, memos that were not memos, anonymous things that even the journalists themselves could not actually say where they came from. If I quote somebody anonymously, I know who it is, and my editor knows who it is, and there is a real reason why you're not quoting that person, because the life may be in danger, or it's a rape survivor who really doesn't, you know, can't handle seeing her face or name in the media. You know, there's a reason. But this was just one anonymous nonsense thing after another anonymous nonsense thing that people the journalists involved never even cared to explain what it was. It was basically, they investigated criminals. That's basically all that the unit did. And for the rest, all the other stuff that they said was just not true.
Mm. Part of what we learned through the book is your shared, call it, love for social justice. In fact, I imagine those were the circumstances under which you met in Lusaka. It's very, I guess, again, now that we're here, it makes a beautiful story to tell in some respects. In fact, you've written a book about it. But, you know, take us through what that has meant for, you know, your relationship, considering the many things that were at stake, not only through the diversity of your backgrounds, but in some respects because of the diversity of the work you do.
It was very difficult always for me as an observer and a journalist, and he as an integral part of first the resistance against apartheid and then later trying to help build this South Africa. And then you go through this whole rogue unit breakdown, state capture business together. So it was quite a process to do this. But I'm happy we did this because it needs to be told together. Of course, politicians will focus on one thing, economists will focus on another thing, tax practitioners will focus on some nitty-gritty. But for people to understand what actually happened, you need to tell the story of how it started in Lusaka and how you were full of hope under the Mandela government and tried to bring up kids when the white Model C school was still very white and very, difficult to deal with. You already saw the first signs of a breakdown of an ANC that people had thought was a massive, efficient machine that was now going to make this country right and get rid of apartheid and build a public service for 55 million people. Well, our ANC branch in Centurion in the mid-90s was it was just a former municipal messenger who suddenly named himself chairman and proceeded to keep the veterans away because he wanted to remain the chairman. And I described that in the book as well.
Right. What we also learned through the book, of course, Ivan, is your illustrious journey. I mean, having had worked on Operation Vola, an underground operation that was looking to get some of the anti-apartheid activists back into the country, to working at the National Intelligence Agency. Now that, again, you're able to look back, what have you been able to take in those experiences that helped you, for lack of a better term, undo some of the knots you found tied within SARS once you got there?
Yeah, look, one learns a number of things. The one would be what is very, very important is in the selection of people, one selects for value. One must select for values and the repeated pattern of behavior. Mm-hmm. That's very important. And it's not the behavior at this time or that time, but what is the behavior over a long period. The second thing is that we must manage risk. It's what we did in the old days in the underground struggle, what we do in intelligence, and what you have to do in art. But I imagine that in Africa, with the amount of crime that we have, all of us, including you have to manage risks continuously. So we learn about managing risks. I think the third thing is that it brought to me, it inculcated in me a thoroughness about the work we do. Mm. And that to get the work done actually requires serious application. And it does require serious knowledge. It's not just common sense. And we cannot go about things in a lackadaisical way. We've got to apply ourselves seriously. And above all, why we have to do it seriously is that we're carrying a huge history, a huge burden. This is a very divided country.
Right.
It's divided for a long time. We've got to bring people together. So it's serious work.
Absolutely. And hopefully it's work that will continue addressing as fervently as you have, and I guess many other people who no doubt will still to come. Let me thank you for your time and for sharing with us your experiences also through the book you've written. Evelyn Groenink is the author of this book, also a investigative journalist and former Deputy SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay. Let me thank you once again both for your time on the AM Report.